Hi, everybody. This is the Inspire Health podcast here on UK Health Radio, and I am your host, Dr. Jason Loken. I'm a naturopathic doctor and an osteopathic manual practitioner. And today we are continuing on with our series on life, death, and beyond, exploring our greater reality. And if you're new to our channel, we often like to pick a topic and then round it out by talking to a lot of different diverse people and really try and get to the heart of it and expand our perspective and our concepts of what we thought we knew about any of these major topics. So if you're new to the channel, go check out at inspirehealthpodcast.com. Sign up for the newsletter and you will be notified of any new information that is going on. While you're there, take a look at the courses section where we have created something called Inspire Life Multiversity, where we are creating our own series of different courses where we are really trying to bring knowledge and make it tangible. One thing that's come up over and over again in the different interviews is the importance of experience. We are needing to move from more of just information to making it tangible experience. This is what makes everything real for us and actually allows us to integrate it into our lives. So we've got a couple of courses up there right at the moment. We have a bunch more that are going to be coming as we are going to be collaborating with some of the amazing guests that we have on our show. So sign up for that as well, and then we will notify you as more and more courses become available. Today we are talking to psychologist and past life regression therapist Dr. Linda Backman. And Dr. Backman's been working with past life regression for over 3 decades. So she has a ton of experience in this. And this is one of the areas that we wanted to explore in more detail in really just understanding life, death, and this greater reality, and her experience of working with people for so long, and how this works with speaking with our guides and soul clusters and connecting to angelic spirits and all of these different pieces, because what you'll often find is that people can actually have spontaneous healings shortly after these types of sessions. And so I was curious to learn more about this from her, and how do we connect more with our spirit guides? What is the story around Ascended Masters? Where do they come from? We get into so many details in this episode. I think this is a fascinating episode, and I love the work that Dr. Backman is doing. And this was a fairly long episode, so we're actually breaking this up into 2 parts. So you're going to hear part 1, and at the end of around 50 minutes or so, we will stop it, and then join us next week for part 2 as we go into the whole next section. You know, we are going to talk about things like, why do good things seem to happen to bad people? Can we make sense out of some of the challenges and the struggles that we experience in our lives? We will also discover some of the most common questions that people ask during past life regression sessions, and how to connect more to our support and our guides on the other side. So a fascinating episode. Make sure to tune into next week's as well to hear the second half of this story. And we are going to be coming to the close pretty soon of this series, and then we'll be moving on to our new series, which is going to be all around creating New Earth, a collaborative vision, a collaborative mission. And we're going to be talking to a lot of different people in the areas of health and wellness, education, water, what's going on with all of these different areas, and how do we really set the stage to move into a world that we all really want to be creating and moving towards. So we'll have more information on that soon too, and super excited as we are getting our list of speakers that we want to be a part of this specific series. So thank you so much for tuning in. If you're enjoying these episodes, please hit like, subscribe, and share the content. That is the best way for us to be able to get our message out to a wider audience. So thank you so much for all of you that are tuning in and that are curious about this type of content, because I think this stuff will make an absolutely huge impact on your life and the way that you are able to impact others and the world around you. So thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Inspire Health podcast. And today's guest is Dr. Linda Backman. And Dr. Backman has been featured on Coast to Coast AM and Gaia TV. She's an expert teacher, regression therapist, and licensed psychologist with 45 years of private practice experience, including over 25 years guiding soul regressions. She has conducted thousands of past life and between lives soul regressions in person and remotely. Linda founded the Ravenheart Center and Training Institute in Boulder, Colorado in 1997 and teaches regularly worldwide. She's the author of Souls on Earth, The Evolving Soul, and Bringing Your Soul to Light, a couple of books you can see here on the YouTube video. She is an international expert in understanding how reincarnation plays a pivotal role in your personal growth and relationships. And we are super excited to have her on the show with us today. Linda, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jason and Taya. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I think this will be really fascinating. We were just saying we've had such fascinating conversations in this entire series. I think this has probably been the biggest series we've run so far, because even as we've gotten halfway through it, we keep finding other people that we think will bring another angle to this perspective. With the whole purpose of this is to just keep bringing a larger perspective so that we can think differently, that we can perceive the world differently, we can make different choices based on new information and how we show up in the world.
And we can even see our challenges in life differently.
Yeah, I think a lot of the work that you've done in your books, I think, brings that to light over and over again as you've gone through the different regressions. I'm wondering, Linda, for people that aren't too familiar with this type of work, can you start by giving us a bit of an overview of what is past life regression and how that process works, and how people are able to tap into their past lives, and how you even came to this to begin with?
It's a loaded question.
Yeah, that might be the whole interview right there.
A loaded question with perhaps not a small answer. Okay. I'll just try to give you, it's always hard to put it in a nutshell. I'll just give the listeners and the two of you the quickie version, so to speak, of how did I get into this work. So I'm a licensed psychologist by training. I often say to clients that my clients come in two different flavors, flavor A and flavor B. I'm flavor B. So flavor A of my clients is people that come for regression, which I'm happy to explain in a moment. People that come for regression, and they've known they are a soul and body, perhaps with a guide, with a loved one on the other side, perhaps, that serves as a guide. They've known that since they were 5 to maybe 15 years old. That's flavor A. Flavor B is me, as well as many other people. I didn't believe in any of this until I was in my middle 40s, which now, relatively speaking, is a long time ago, but approximately 30 years ago. So when I was in my middle 40s, I had a very dear colleague die. And again, I'll just say, I didn't necessarily believe in reincarnation, the soul. I just basically knew little or nothing about that. When he passed, two things happened. I started sensing his presence. I could intuit that he was communicating with me. That seemed weird and almost exciting at the same time. And then I found that in my mind's eye, in the darkness of my bedroom in the morning or at night, when I was in bed, I believe that I began to see scenes of past lives I'd shared with him. So I thought, either I'm losing my mind and, I need medication and a therapist, which there's nothing wrong with that, but, or there's something to this. So again, to try to make this short, I said to my husband, who's still my spouse, I said to my husband, could you sit down? I want to tell you what's going on with me. We've always been pretty liberal people, but we'd never talked about soul and reincarnation. So my husband sits down. I explained to him what's going on. He knew my colleague well. They were friends. They played golf together at times. And I told my husband, what was happening for me. And essentially, my husband looked at me calmly, and I said, okay, I can tell from the look on your face, you don't think this is strange, right? Which surprised me. He said, no. I said, why? And basically he said that he must have repressed something that occurred for him as a child. And what he told me was new to me, but he'd repressed it for, 30 years or some such thing. He said when he was a boy growing up, he knew his past lives in detail. And he said he never questioned it, but he never told anyone, and he forgot about it. He thought no one would believe him. So that was permission for me. That was sort of like what we might call carte blanche to move forward. And as a psychologist, I was nervous because I thought, oh, many of my referrals and colleagues are medical doctors, and they're going to think I'm crazy. That never happened, and my work began to change. So I began to discover, as I took training in hypnosis, training in regression, and I guide both past life regression, but I guide also between lives regression, originally the work of my mentor years ago, Dr. Michael Newton. I guide clients to discover their past lives that explain things in life today and who they are as a soul. Why are they in body? How did they plan their lives? What do symptoms that they have mean? Are they past life symptoms? Are they, there's a term that we often use, HSP, highly sensitive person. For what reason are they a highly sensitive person? What's that about? And I'll stop there without going any farther. And so regression is easier than people think it will be when they're guided by an experienced and trained therapist.
Linda, I'm curious, did your experience and your insights that you were getting, did they in any way conflict with your upbringing and prior beliefs or even religious upbringing that you may have had?
That's a beautiful question. For me, primarily, the answer's no. I was raised in a Western religion, but I learned little or nothing about soul, reincarnation, any of that. And then I began to expand that. So just for listeners, if listeners are, raised or continue to be involved in a Western religion, there are mystical teachings from many of the Western religions. The Sufis, the Kabbalah teachings teach reincarnation. But I didn't know that because I wasn't raised with any of that. So for the most part, it didn't conflict.
I've had conversations with lots of different people this past while that, like you had said earlier, sometimes feel like they're actually going a little bit crazy because whatever's been going on, particularly, I think, over the past few years, it's shaking a lot of people up. And I find a lot of people are connecting to past lives, almost like conflicting with their current reality a little bit and how they're even showing up and even what feels more real in certain ways and how they're even seeing a lot of times they're wanting to make big changes in their life right now, which is challenging given the way their life is set up. When some of this stuff starts to come forward for them, and this has not even been doing actually regression, I feel like there's almost spontaneously coming up for people. What's going on with that right at the moment from your perspective, or have you seen more of that too? And how do people start to navigate it when that surfaces?
The Inspire Health podcast will be right back.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
Well, I think, Jason, sort of what you're referring to is people are looking for more answers. They're looking for more explanation. Why do I have this fear that seems to have nothing to do with my current life? Why do I have this physical symptom that doesn't seem to relate to my current life? Why do I want a deeper understanding of life? I mean, I think that we all know life in body on this planet can be challenging, from health issues to relationship problems and childhood abuse issues, and it just kind of goes on from there. And I'll just say, at the heart of my hearts, I'm a therapist. I started out as a psychotherapist, and became a psychologist. Actually, my mentor, Dr. Michael Newton, was also a trained therapist. So my goal with people is to help people understand, why am I who I am? In other words, why have I had these challenges? Why did I grow up with an alcoholic mother? Or why did I have a father who passed when I was 12? Why have I had an autoimmune disorder since I was 18? Why do I feel I don't fit on this planet? Who am I, and for what reason am I here? And I think the overall goal, it's always hard to make it simple, but if I try to make it simple, it's to help people normalize themselves, normalize themselves to themselves, if I can put it that way, and stop judging themselves and stop thinking there's something wrong with them. And almost always through regression, there are explanations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really beautiful, Linda. And I know even from my side, I mean, I practice as a naturopathic doctor and an osteopath. And when I've actually seen the realm of spontaneous healing, it's usually when something along those lines occurs. It's some sort of an aha moment that just lands for them and lets them let go of whatever it was. Either it just doesn't mean anything anymore, or there's something that settles, and like an answer that just arrives, and it's like everything just shifts, and then the healing process is able to be facilitated. Have you found things like that too in your practice?
I mean, yes, and you certainly know, Jason, through your work, your osteopathy, and your broader practice, is that our physical body can hold trauma. Yeah, I mean, yes, it can hold trauma from current life. That's certainly possible. But our physical body also holds trauma from past lives. And when we latch on to, oh, here's what happened in the past life, I'd say 8 to 9 times out of 10, that physical symptom is either completely obliterated or certainly lessened to the point that the patient copes with it in a more effective manner. And I know we'll get into conversation in our time today to also talk about different types of souls or soul origin. And that also explains oftentimes emotional symptoms, physical symptoms that at times just simply go away, which is kind of amazing.
It really is, and I think it gives such a different perspective to healing when you start to expand out into looking at what I kind of think of these different bodies of health and how we can address these ones farther up the chain and more abstract than the physical body. And it segues perfectly, because I wanted to ask you, you talk specifically about earth-based souls, interplanetary souls, and then angelic. And I'm wondering if you can break that down for us, and then we can get into more of the nuts and bolts around that, because I know you talk about differences between purpose for each one of those, and even liabilities and different things. So wherever you want to go with that, I'd love to share some of that information with the audience.
Okay, beautiful. Well, this is a paradigm that came to me through my clients. And it's a paradigm that I learned a little bit about when I was being trained in regression, which is over 20 years ago now, maybe 25 years ago. But it's my clients that teach me. And that's what I absolutely love. And I don't work as a channel or a medium. I basically guide my clients to become their own channel. But my sort of encyclopedia, so to speak, of who are we as a soul? Where do we come from? Why are we here? Why do we have these issues or these skills and gifts? Stems from about 27, 28 years of guiding regression. So that said, my original paradigm was, so I'm trying to think how to make this simple. My original paradigm was a soul incarnates on the earth. And the basic picture of that, I always try to boil things down enough that anybody could comprehend it. So the original paradigm is that a soul agrees, and it truly is an agreement, agrees to come into body on earth. And earth is school. Earth is the sometimes challenging laboratory of learning, moment by moment, year by year, relationship by relationship, and that sort of thing. So as my client regression practice, continued over the course of years, maybe about 8 to 10 years into about 27 or so years of regression practice, I started having numerous clients that are souls that aren't primarily designed to come to earth. There's basically two types of those souls. So let me just step backwards for a minute. The first type of soul is what I call an earth-based soul. And an earth-based soul is a soul that basically originates to primarily incarnate on earth and grow and evolve lifetime to lifetime to lifetime. We all trip and fall in certain lives. We have what we call karma, but we also have dharma, meaning what we learn and accomplish. An earth-based soul comes here to earth primarily. Then there are souls from the greater celestial realm. I use the term interplanetary. You could exchange that term with ET, starseed. Those terms really mean the same. Souls come into body on earth on occasion who come from locations in the universe. Now, setting aside angelic souls, I'll come to that in a moment or two, but interplanetary souls come from somewhere in the universe, star systems, planets, interdimensional space. And if those souls, or when those souls agree to come to earth, they agree to come because they come from a healthy culture somewhere in the greater universe. We need their healthy perspective. Now, they don't come to earth as, in terms of evolution, they don't come to earth as 10s on a scale of 10, but they come to earth as usually 8s and a halves on a scale of 10. And they have you might just say a healthier notion of life. How should we treat each other? What's a healthy diet? What's a healthy way of relating to someone? Basically understanding, I don't know, it's always hard to put words to this, cleaner living. And I don't just mean cleaner diet. How to honor their own needs, their own emotions, how to honor someone else's needs and emotions. Those are interplanetary souls. Interplanetary souls often, not always, but often struggle with being in body. They have trouble with some of the, I know I keep using the word healthy, unhealthy. They struggle with a lot of human unhealthy behavior, mistreatment, ignoring someone's needs, ignoring their emotions. But they also struggle with a lot of, not just, they struggle with their own emotional issues sometimes. They struggle with a lot of physiological kinds of things. They struggle with allergies, autoimmune disorders, digestive issues. Sometimes they're diagnosed on the spectrum. They're very wise, but they're not. I'll use an example of a dear friend that I know is an IP soul. She's a medical doctor. She's a very capable OBGYN medical doctor. She was, and how old is she? She's about 60 or so. She was diagnosed with lupus years ago. So she changed her diet. She changed her way of working. But she has to pay close attention to her own physical and emotional needs. IP souls also have extreme gifts, musical gifts, artistic gifts, teaching gifts, and that sort of thing. So those are interplanetary souls. I work with a lot of those still in my ongoing practice. So I'll pause for a minute and I can go on more, but you guys may have questions and then I'll chat about angelics.
So it sounds like the interplanetary souls have gifts and abilities and talents that would be beneficial to be shared with humanity, with those living on the planet. But at the same time, when they come in, because this is not really their home or area where they typically visit often, then there's they have trouble climatizing to the realm. Is that correct?
That's just a perfect way, Taya, of explaining it. And climatizing is a good word. It's like, yes, it's like they'll say, I just can't be in big crowds. Big crowds drive me crazy. I can't be in, situations where people are acting crazy or there's just unhealthy behavior. The beauty of regression, and let me just say, sometimes these people have an inkling they're not from here, and that's the way they say it. Sometimes they have no inkling. I, at times, begin to get a hunch during the interview, pre-regression, that they're interplanetary. I don't tell them that at all. I just sort of zip it up, and because the regression is the avenue of discovering that. And so they discover it during the regression, and then we process it after the regression. And suddenly it's like, oh, there's something wrong with me. I'm not weird. I really work hard to help them normalize who they are. But yes, they're often quite skilled. I use a quick example, and listeners may or may not, they can go look this up on the internet. Maybe 3 years ago, there was a man who won America's Got Talent. A man in his 30s. He'd been diagnosed on the spectrum. He had he was visually challenged. His mother was his key support person. And this young man was incredibly talented musically. He wrote music. He is a singer-songwriter. Again, you can find him on the internet. He had these incredible gifts. He also had these incredible challenges.
Is there a difference in the purpose then for coming here, whether you're from interplanetary or if you're Earth-based, as far as incarnating back here on Earth between those two groups?
Good question. Overall, I would say no. Let me try. It's like such a big subject, and I want to make it sort of palatable. An Earth-based soul starts off their soul's evolution in the Earth body, incarnate on Earth, embodied on Earth, and they start off as very young souls. Now, the bottom line is, in my regression work, truly, I don't work with very young souls. Not that there's anything wrong with that. We were all, if we're Earth-based, we were all young souls. But young souls aren't really ready or interested in regression and spirituality and this kind of perspective. But so Earth-based souls that I work with are usually at least mid-range of soul evolution. And so just giving that as a kind of a precursor statement, Earth-based souls and IP souls, interplanetary souls, come to continue evolving. They also come to aid the needed evolution of humanity. So yes is the answer, that there's a related similarity to wanting to affect change in our human culture.
And what about soul clusters, Linda? Do Earth-based souls get born into IP families or vice versa? Or do you find that we're typically sticking with our soul clusters, which are separate? What has been your experience?
Yeah. Okay. Earth-based souls, to use that term cluster, I often call it a soul group, but cluster works too. Earth-based souls begin their incarnational journey. Another way to put it is in a soul homeroom. I realize in many places in the world, homeroom doesn't exist anymore. I grew up with homeroom. So earth-based souls initially, as they're evolving, belong to a small group of souls, about 15 to 20 souls. Interplanetary souls also belong to a small group of souls when they come into being, and even before they incarnate on Earth. Interplanetary souls come from a very small soul cluster. It's usually 2 to 5 souls in total. But they do, so just again, to make it simple, Earth-based EB, interplanetary IP. EBs and IPs have fellow souls in their soul homeroom. For Earth-based souls, I'll say I happen to be an Earth-based soul. We incarnate repetitively with many of the souls in our immediate cluster and surrounding clusters. Sort of like a stem of grapes. On that stem of grapes is our cluster, or my cluster, and then there are adjacent clusters. So, quick example would be, I have 2 adult children. Our oldest child is from my cluster. Our youngest child is from, you might say, the cluster next door. Interplanetary souls, when they come to Earth, might incarnate with a soul from their small cluster. They often incarnate with Earth-based souls. And so, as I was saying to a client yesterday, who discovered she was interplanetary through her regression, and she's married. So an interplanetary soul in a primary romantic relationship usually is married or in a, long-standing romantic relationship with an EB. Why? You guys could probably guess, but why? Because they need the stability and the familiarity of being with someone who, you might say, gets Earth to some extent. Yeah.
Fascinating. Mm-hmm. What about angelic souls then?
Yeah. This is the sort of, I'll say, newest, even though it's not, I've probably been working with, overtly working with angelic souls for 10 to 12 years. But the key details of angelics came to me as kind of the latter piece of understanding different types of souls. So, angelic souls come from the angelic realm. What's the purpose of the angelic realm? That's to support divine energy. You can call it God, you can call it the source, you call it the Tao, call it what you want. Divine energy is that high frequency of extremely evolved energy that understands healthiness in all ways. So there is a cadre of souls that make up the angelic realm. They really are messengers or ambassadors of divine energy. And the easiest way I like to describe it is the signature energy of an angelic soul, if I'm working with one in my practice, is they carry pure love and compassion energy. They have this heart that is huge. Now, they have to learn how to protect that to some extent. But their whole orientation to life is right-brained, is caring and nurturance, is almost total non-judgment. And we need them. We need that perspective on Earth in greater quantities because we don't have enough love, compassion, and non-judgment on our planet. Angelic souls also like IPs. Angelic souls aren't really designed to come to Earth. IPs and angelics, or what I call angelic realm or AR, IPs and ARs, I know again through regression, spend a lot of time before they ever incarnate on Earth being prepared at their home location to be able to come to Earth and cope with the way humanity operates. But angelic realm souls tend to be the most, I was going to say the most vulnerable. IPs are rather vulnerable, but angelic realm souls bring this quality of caring about everyone. And then they have to learn how to deal with that on Earth, but they are fascinating people.
The Inspire Health podcast will be right back.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
You can totally see where you would almost need to like have a buddy system where it's like you connect with angelic ones, connect with earth-based ones or IPs, like to really create a bit of a support network for each other. Because if you're all just in like one group, it could be really challenging to be here. Like you almost need to have the earth-based souls to bring some kind of support and grounding for these other people.
A bit of a GPS system.
Yeah.
Yes, and in families, if there isn't so most families, just if everybody that's listening just thinks about their own immediate blood family, in those blood families there are always EBs, but in those blood families they're probably, in that immediate nuclear family, there's usually at least an IP or an AR. Now, no one's family would have a lot of IPs or ARs. Two reasons. One is there are not a lot of IPs or ARs on the planet, even though I come into contact with a lot of them because of what I do. And it's to help them cope with being here and continue to live their purpose. But IPs and ARs in nuclear families are less common than EBs. And just like you're saying, Jason, EBs are sort of like, they have a bit of a better map of how to navigate human life, those EBs.
Linda, what about ascended masters that we've heard of? So the Jesus, the Buddha, and some of these figures that have stepped into our realm to be able to navigate all of humanity in a particular direction that is more beneficial for all of us.
I love that question because it's such an important piece. Again, a couple of comments. So these souls that we know, again, as Jesus, Buddha, but also highly advanced souls. Oh my gosh, let me see if I can not make this too complicated. So just a quick comment about the soul of Jesus. And I'll just say that religion doesn't necessarily formal Western religion, and of course Eastern religion, because Eastern religion teaches reincarnation and that sort of thing. But formal Western religion can easily sit side by side these concepts. The soul of Jesus, we all know if we study Christianity, Jesus didn't found Christianity. It's those that came after Jesus that founded Christianity. We also know, if you study it, that soul's name wasn't Jesus. That's a name given to that soul post-crucifixion. So when we think about Jesus, Buddha, Moses, and then a lot of other names like Master Saint Germain, Dwal Kul, many of these ascended master names. Virtually all of these ascended masters, excluding the archangels, which I'll say a bit about, these ascended masters that we're talking about, these are advanced earth-based souls. They've spent lots of lives on earth. Some of them still incarnate. Some of them do not incarnate any longer. So they are very real. They are like senior guides, senior spiritual guides. None of us are without a spiritual guide. Then the archangels. And when I say the archangels, a lot of people think of the classic four. My understanding, again, all this comes from regression, repetitive client regression, where I overlap information. I heard it from this client and that client, and then 3 months later, another client, and blah, blah, blah. The archangels, of course, they are the head souls of the angelic realm, a step or two below the divine. And of course, they're angelic souls. They do also operate as guides. I actually had a client, I don't know, Tuesday, I think it was, doesn't matter. Archangel Gabriel was her guide. And the way the information came forward, I have no doubt that Archangel Gabriel is her guide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In regards to guides, how do you find that people can strengthen that connection with their guides, and on a regular basis with that sort of connection to a higher guidance, to something that's outside of just the ego, mind, identity, perceived sort of limitations, perceptions that often we kind of get caught up in, and sort of tap into something that's a little bit higher wisdom, I would say?
Yeah, I have 2 or 3 responses. I want to try to remember them all if I can. One overriding word, and it's so easy to say this, but I think it's so important, is trust. Because the 3 of us are sitting here talking. We aren't the norm on the planet. This conversation is not the norm on the planet. You guys know that, I'm sure.
That's why we're having it, to make it more normal.
We're trying to normalize these conversations.
Yeah, and it's so important that you do what you do, because yes, then you broaden, you sort of, the fancy word would be promulgate. You spread this, which is awesome. But you're doing, I'm sure, what you've been guided to do. And that's so often what I talk to people about is follow your passions, follow where you're drawn. So trust is one. I often talk to people about intuition, and even spiritual people need some reminders. So intuition is left brain, right brain. And so some of us intuitively, we're very imagery based. We see scenes in our mind's eye, eyes open, eyes closed. We perceive intuitive scenes. Trust those intuitive scenes. So that's clairvoyance. Then there's clairsentience. Many of us, this happens to me, I can walk into a room and suddenly I'm feeling an emotion, and it took me years to figure out I'm not necessarily feeling my own emotion. I'm not necessarily filled with anxiety for my own personal reasons. I'm not necessarily feeling a little down for my own personal reasons. I might be feeling somebody else's feelings. But in the case of clairsentience, sometimes when our guide shows up, if our guide knows we're strongly clairsentient or emotion-based with our intuition, our guide knows that our guide could use a trigger emotion. Like suddenly we feel joy, or suddenly we feel like laughing. And it's like, well, where did that come from? That's because we're clairsentient, and that might be our guide's, signature way of getting us to know they're there. Some of us are clairsomatic. Our body is our physical receiver. My husband's very much this way. He might wake up in the morning And he'll say, oh, my lower back feels kind of uncomfortable. We'll turn on the TV, we'll turn on the news, and there's been an earthquake halfway around the globe. He's feeling that. So that's clairsomatic. A guide can give us a trigger symptom. It could be an eyelid twitching. It could be a popping of our eardrum. But our body might be our receptor. Then lastly, and this is extremely common and it happens for me a lot, I'm rather mental. And so my guides show up in my thoughts, like they give me words, phrases, suggestions. They keep prompting me with a name of somebody. So I reach out to that maybe friend I haven't seen in 6 months. And the friend says, oh, Linda, I'm so glad you reached out to me. I'm really having a big problem, but I didn't want to bother you. So if we trust we're left-brained, right-brained, and we're intuitive, that's how we can connect with our guides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I've also found, like, pay attention to synchronicities that keep lining up. I always find that is like a fun one. It's almost like a spiritual kind of, like yes or something. I find
it's like our guides are having fun with us.
Totally. And just to pick up on that, Taya, for just a moment, our guides like to have fun with us. And oh my gosh, I've heard in so many regressions said by the guide to the client, you've got to take more time to lighten up. You've got to take more time to play. What do you love to do? Go do it more. So that's so important.
Well, that probably ties back even into our soul's purpose. And I think in your book, you talk about the soul's purpose as well as the soul's promise and vow. And can you break that down a little bit? And as far as how do people that are struggling with that connect more into their soul's original intention? The
easy way, if people will think about this, is when I say you, anybody listening, what are you passionate about? Are you passionate about helping others? Are you, people often think, okay, if I'm going to figure out my soul's purpose, it's got to be, well, I should write a book, or, well, I should do something very overt that's work related. That's often a piece of our soul's purpose. But at times our soul's purpose is to be the most committed parent we can be, or the most committed neighbor we can be, that it doesn't have to be magnanimous. Yes. And I mean, even if I think about myself, it's always easier to use myself as an example. Yes, of course, my soul's purpose is to do the work that I do. But along with that, I know a lot about my past lives. I, spent years researching and learning about my own past lives. I have past lives where I was a parent and I was a negligent parent in past lives. We've all had past lives where we behaved in ways we wish we hadn't. That's just, it's the norm of human incarnation because we have free will when we come into the human body. But I know that I've past lives as an unevolved parent. Fortunately, I always wanted to be a parent in this lifetime, so that's good. But I knew part of the balance that I was to accomplish in my life today was to be a mother, was to be a grandmother, which I am, and to have that be a very important part of my life. So people need to think about, what do they love and what really resonates, and we might say turns them on, lights them up. What is that? And follow that.
Thank you for joining us for part 1 of our interview with Dr. Linda Backman. Please join us next week as we carry on with part 2.